License and registration, now! The voice cracked through the morning glare like a whip. Officer Kyle Harlan leaned toward the driver's window, one hand on his holster, the other hovering near his radio. His breath smelled of coffee and regret. Around him, horns blared on the I-10, sunlight glinting off every windshield like shards of truth he didn't want to face. The woman behind the wheel didn't flinch. Her calm unnerved him more than any weapon ever had. Before going into this story, where are you watching from? Take a second to subscribe to the channel. And if stories of justice and truth matter to you, give this video a like. It helps bring real voices to light. The morning had begun like any other for Elena Vargas, director of the FBI's Los Angeles field office. She kissed her daughter Sophia on the forehead before school, reminded her not to forget her debate notes, and stepped into the familiar hum of traffic that defined the city's dawn. She liked the order of the morning, the steady rhythm of headlights and brake lights, the radio chatter of agents checking in, the voice of her daughter laughing through the Bluetooth. Then came the flash, blue and red lights bouncing across the mirror, the metallic screech of a siren cutting through the sun. For a brief second, she thought it must be for someone else. Her signal was clean, her speed steady. But the patrol car didn't pass. It slowed, sliding in behind her like a shadow gaining purpose. Officer Kyle Harlan had started his shift 30 minutes earlier. The whiskey from last night still clung to his breath. Masked only by bitter coffee, he told himself he wasn't drunk, just steadying his nerves. Divorce papers waited unsigned on his counter, his rent late, his father's voice echoing from memory. Never trust anyone who doesn't look like you. That voice had shaped him more than he'd ever admit. He'd seen her car, a black sedan with government plates, signal late between lanes. That was all the reason he needed. His finger tapped the light switch, his thoughts hardening before he even saw the driver's face. Elena eased her car to the shoulder near the Fairfax exit, tires crunching against loose gravel. The morning sun spilled across the dashboard, a blinding orange that always brought her father's memory. That same Tijuana morning when a police bullet took him away. She breathed once, slow and deep, before lowering her window. "Good morning. Officer? Is there a problem?" Her tone was even, not defensive. Years in law enforcement had taught her that calm was its own weapon. Kyle didn't answer right away. He looked at her ID resting on the console, saw the small gold badge beside it, and felt his chest tighten, failed to signal lane change. He muttered, still scanning the car. Elena pressed a small button on her watch, the hidden FBI recorder. "For record purposes, please state your badge number." That request landed like an insult. His father's words came back again. About mouthy women, about respect, about control. Kyle's jaw twitched. "Ma'am, don't start playing lawyer. It's 7:30 in the morning, and I don't need attitude." She turned her head slightly, sunlight catching the scar on her wrist, the one from a field raid years ago. "I'm not playing anything. You pulled over a federal vehicle without probable cause." The air between them thickened. Drivers slowed to watch, cell phones lifting discreetly through half-rolled windows. Across the lane divider, Javier Morales, a young trucker, leaned forward in his cab. He saw the officer's stance, the woman's composure, and something in his gut told him to hit record. His phone began streaming live on TikTok. The caption simple: "Traffic stop on I-10, something feels wrong." Kyle slammed his door shut, walking toward her front bumper. "Step out of the car. I don't think that's necessary." "Now!" The sound of his shout carried across the traffic jam. A nearby driver flinched. Elena kept her hands visible on the wheel. "Officer, I am advising you that this interaction is being recorded under federal authority." He smirked, one hand brushing the butt of his pistol. "You think that scares me? You people always think." She cut him off gently. "You people? That moment, that pause, stretched too long. Kyle's face flushed, the sun cutting across his eyes. He pulled the weapon free, pointing it down but trembling. "Get out of the car!" Someone screamed from another vehicle. Tires screeched. The city noise faded, leaving only heartbeat and sunlight. Then came the sound, a crack like the sky splitting open. He had fired upward, a warning shot that echoed down the freeway. Birds scattered into the orange haze for one terrifying instant. It was as if the whole city stopped breathing. Elena didn't move. Her voice, calm but firm, sliced through the silence. "You just discharged a weapon without cause. This scene is now a federal matter." Her tone jolted him, cold authority wrapped in restraint. His grip faltered. He realized too late the badge glinting from her dashboard wasn't local. It read, Federal Bureau of Investigation. Director, Los Angeles Field Office. The thought hit him harder than recoil. Around them, traffic lights continued to blink. Javi's phone kept streaming. Within minutes, 3 million people would see the clip. An LAPD officer, shaking, standing before a Latina woman who hadn't even raised her voice. Elena leaned back, pulse steady but heavy. In her mind flashed her father's last morning. The shouts, the gun, the glare of the sun. She whispered under her breath. Not again. A radio crackled from her dash. "Director Vargas, this is command. Are you safe?" She hesitated before answering. For now, Kyle took a step back, eyes darting between her badge and the growing ring of cameras. He holstered his gun, voice cracking. "Stay in the vehicle! Backup's coming!" Elena didn't reply. She simply folded her hands, palms steady in the same light that once blinded her as a child. The sun climbed higher, painting the freeway in gold and glass. Somewhere behind them, sirens began to rise, a chorus of judgment carried on morning air. That was how it began. One stop, one trigger, one woman who refused to tremble, and the light of Los Angeles, for the first time in years, showed everything it had been trying to hide. The freeway had never seemed so still. Even the wind paused, carrying the echo of that gunshot along the concrete walls like a warning that morning itself had gone too far. Officer Kyle Harlan stood frozen by his patrol car, sweat streaking down his temples, the gun still trembling in his hand. His mind scrambled for justification, something, anything, to make sense of what he'd just done. He had fired into the sky, but the world below was now aimed squarely at him. Elena Vargas sat motionless behind the wheel, her breathing shallow but controlled. She'd faced armed suspects, cartel assassins, and domestic terror briefings. None of that compared to this, a uniformed man with authority and fear tangled inside him, his judgment unspooling beneath the morning sun. She lowered her window again, voice calm and measured. "Officer, for the record, please confirm your name and badge number." Kyle blinked, disoriented. The words barely registered. "You think this is a game? Latinas always weaving through traffic like they own it," he muttered, too low for most to hear. But the FBI recorder on her wrist caught every syllable. In the lane beside them, truck driver Javier Morales clenched his phone tighter. His live stream counter jumped past 30,000 viewers. The chat scrolled like wildfire. Comments in English, Spanish, and Spanglish overlapping. "She's calm as hell. That cop's losing it. Hashtag justice on 10. Cars idled, some reversed off the shoulder. The golden glare turned harsh, painting everyone's faces with heat and tension." Elena kept her voice steady. "I'm asking again. Officer, state your cause for this stop." Kyle slammed his door so hard the sound cut through the air like a verdict. Didn't signal. That's cause enough. He paced in front of her car, one hand on his belt, the other twitching near his holster. His pulse thudded in his ears. The crowd of trapped commuters had become a mirror of judgment. Eyes, phones, voices he couldn't silence. You discharged your weapon, she said evenly. You need to call it in. He stopped walking. Don't tell me what I need to do. Elena felt a strange stillness in her chest, the kind that came before big decisions. I'm not telling you as a civilian, she replied quietly. I'm telling you as a federal officer. That line shattered something in him. Federal what? His voice broke into a laugh that wasn't laughter. You think dropping a title changes what I saw? You were nervous, reaching for something. Could have been a gun. There was no gun. I decide what's a threat on this road. He turned away, radio crackling, but his hand hesitated before pressing the mic. In that hesitation, Elena caught a glimpse of the man behind the badge, tired, angry, ashamed of things he'd never said aloud. Her phone buzzed. It was Sophia, calling from school. For an instant, she thought of ignoring it. Then instinct won. She answered through her car speaker, keeping her eyes on Kyle. Hey, honey, I'm fine. Stay in class, okay? What happened? Mom? People are saying there's a shooting on the freeway. Her throat tightened. It's just noise. Mi vida. Stay safe. I'll call you soon. Kyle's gaze snapped to the sound of the young voice. Turn that off. It's my daughter. I said off. He hit her hood with an open palm. The metallic clang drew gasps from nearby cars. Javier's camera caught it in perfect sunlight. Elena inhaled, deeply. You're being recorded. Officer, don't care. Don't need cause at 7 in the morning, he barked, repeating the phrase like a shield. That sentence would echo across the internet within minutes. It would become a headline, a chant, a question of what need meant when sunlight exposed everything. Traffic reporters began breaking into live coverage. Helicopters hovered, their shadows crossing the freeway like vultures. Someone shouted from another car, "You're on live! Man, chill out!" But Kyle only grew more rigid, cornered by his own fear. He turned back toward Elena, voice cracking. "Step out, now! I will not!" "Then you're resisting." "Resisting what? A false stop?" Their words collided like metal, each one striking harder than the last. The line between law and fear blurred with every syllable. Javier whispered to himself, "Se va a romper todo." This is gonna blow up. Elena looked through her windshield at the rising sun. She remembered her father again, the way morning light hit the street outside their small house in Tijuana, the moment before the police car pulled up, the crack of a gun that turned her childhood into silence. She swallowed the memory before it could take her voice. "Officer Harlan," she said, "you are escalating without cause. This is your last warning." He laughed under his breath. "Oh, you're warning me now?" "Yes," she said. "As director of the FBI's Los Angeles field office." The sentence landed like thunder. His face emptied of color. Around them, the freeway seemed to hold its breath. Even the helicopter blades above paused in rhythm. "What did you say?" he whispered. "You heard me." For one fragile heartbeat. It looked as though he might apologize. Then his pride twisted back into defense. Anyone can claim that. "You think you scare me with some fake badge?" She reached slowly into the console and lifted her identification card, letting it catch the light. The gold seal shimmered. His eyes widened. "I said hands where I can see them." "My hands are right here," she replied softly, palms steady on the steering wheel. "The only person reaching for danger is you." Something in her tone broke through the fog of his anger. For the first time, Kyle saw not a target, but a reflection of everything he'd been trained to suppress. He lowered the gun slightly, confusion flickering behind his eyes. A radio alert crackled through his cruiser. "All units. Code Blue. Report of officer discharge on I-10 westbound. Director Vargas possibly on scene. Confirm immediately." His breath caught. The words Director Vargas repeated twice. He turned toward her again, jaw locked. "Who called that in?" "You did, officer," she said quietly. "When you fired, The truth sank in like heat. He looked around and saw nothing but camera lenses, dashboard recordings, and a rising chorus of digital witnesses. The morning had turned into a tribunal. Elena reached for her phone. Command. "This is Vargas. I need Chief Riley on the line now." Kyle took a step forward. "Hang that up." She didn't. "Confirming discharge at 7:46 a.m., she continued, her tone precise, the same one she used in federal testimony. He slapped the phone from her hand. It hit the pavement and skidded beneath the car, for the crowd. That was the moment everything crossed the line. A woman shouted. "She didn't do anything!" A man yelled. "We got it all on video!" The live stream climbed past 2 million views in 20 minutes. The hashtag #JusticeOn10 appeared on every platform before the next siren even sounded. In that chaos, the sun reached its peak, blinding them both. Kyle stumbled backward, covering his eyes. "I can't see," he murmured. Elena stepped out slowly. Not as a victim, but as a professional who knew daylight had finally chosen sides. "Neither could my father," she said quietly, "but we're all seeing now." Traffic began to move again, not because lanes cleared, but because the world had stopped pretending this was normal, and under that hard Los Angeles light, justice was beginning its slow rise, one frame, one witness, one truth at a time. The sound of sirens rolled toward them like a slow-moving storm. The sun was high enough now that the asphalt shimmered with heat, distorting everything above it. Cars, faces, even the truth itself. Officer Kyle Harlan stood by his cruiser, eyes darting between the gun in his hand and the woman he had just threatened. His thoughts were spinning too fast to form words. Somewhere inside, he still believed he could fix this. That maybe if he stood taller, shouted louder, the morning would rewind. But the flashing lights growing in his rearview mirror told him that time was over. Elena Vargas had already made the call. Her voice, calm and steady through the FBI emergency channel, filled the silence that followed the chaos. "This is Director Vargas. I am on the I-10 westbound near Fairfax. Officer has discharged weapon without cause. Request immediate command response." Her tone was precise, stripped of fear. She'd learned long ago that panic never saved anyone. Kyle lunged forward, snatching the phone from her hand. "Who are you talking to?" he barked, pressing it against his ear, only to hear the unmistakable voice of Chief Marcus Riley on the other end. "Vargas? Elena? Is that you?" Riley's voice cut through the static, firm but uncertain. Kyle's chest tightened. "Chief?" Riley paused, the seconds hanging like rope. "Kyle, put your weapon down right now." The words hit harder than any bullet. Kyle's grip slackened. He turned toward Elena, his face pale. "What the hell is happening?" "What's happening?" she said quietly. "Is that every camera in this city just watched you draw on the wrong person?" Across the divider, Javier Morales' live stream had exploded. 3 million views and counting. Every second replayed from 10 angles. Commenters dissecting every gesture. The image of Kyle's gun pointing toward the woman in the car was now the front page of the internet. Helicopters buzzed overhead. Reporters from early morning shows were already broadcasting live updates. Riley's convoy arrived within minutes. Black SUVs and squad cars forming a semicircle around the scene. Officers stepped out cautiously, hands visible. Cameras tracked every move. One of them whispered, "That's her, FBI Director Vargas." Kyle's mind fractured under the weight of realization. He staggered backward, muttering to himself, No, this isn't. I didn't know." Elena stepped forward, not in anger but control. "You aimed your weapon at a federal director. Officer Harlan, you will surrender it now." The words federal director hung in the air like a sentence already passed. Chief Riley approached, his eyes unreadable behind dark glasses. He had known Kyle since the academy, had watched his father wear the same badge 30 years ago. Loyalty was carved deep in him, but even loyalty had limits. "Kyle," Riley said slowly, "you need to hand over your weapon." Kyle shook his head. "Chief, she provoked me. She was filming. Riley's hand lifted. "Don't make this worse." For a moment, no one breathed. The sun pressed down like judgment itself. Then Kyle's knees gave way. He dropped the gun, its metallic clatter echoing off the guardrail. He sank onto the curb, face in his hands. "Oh, God," he whispered. "I didn't mean to." Elena watched without speaking. She had seen this before, power collapsing under the weight of exposure. The difference now was that the exposure was instant, global, and irreversible. Riley turned to her, voice tight. "Director Vargas, I can't express how sorry I am." "You'll express it in your report," she replied softly. "Every word, every second. Nothing omitted, understood." Behind them, more vehicles stopped. Journalists pressed forward from behind police tape. Someone shouted, "Director Vargas, were you targeted?" Another voice, "Was this racially motivated?" The questions blurred into noise. Elena ignored them. She glanced at her watch. 8:07 a.m. The entire exchange had lasted less than 40 minutes, yet it had altered everything. She turned toward the freeway. The sunlight glinting off the cars still backed up for miles. People inside those cars were already talking, recording, posting. The city had become a witness. Riley knelt beside Kyle, lowering his voice. "You pointed your weapon at an FBI director. Son, there's no coming back from this." Kyle didn't answer. His eyes were vacant, fixed on the gun lying in the dust. "I just wanted to go home," he murmured. "I didn't know who she was." "That's the problem," Riley said, almost to himself. "You didn't have to." 2 federal agents arrived to collect Elena. They guided her toward a waiting SUV, but she stopped halfway, turning to look at the man who'd nearly taken her life. There was no hatred in her eyes, only a tired understanding of how easily mornings like this began. "You'll get medical clearance," she told him quietly, "and you'll face your hearing. Let the system you serve decide your fate." He didn't look up. "Do you even believe it still works?" "I have to," she said. "Otherwise none of this means anything." Riley signaled his officers. "Cuff him." As the metal clicked around his wrists, Kyle's world shrank to the sound of those cuffs and the heat on his face. Cameras zoomed in. The live stream counter jumped again. Commenters wrote things like, "He looks scared now and about time." Elena sat in the back seat of the SUV, the hum of the engine a strange comfort. Through the window, she watched Kyle being led away, shoulders slumped, eyes hollow, a man realizing too late that the line between fear and hatred had destroyed him. Her phone buzzed again. It was Sophia. She hesitated, then answered. "Mom?" The girl's voice trembled. "They're saying on the news. I'm okay." "Honey," Elena interrupted softly. "It's over for now. You're on every channel." "I know." She paused, glancing at the sky, now a blinding blue without mercy. "Promise me you'll stay in school today." "I'm not scared." "Mom," Sophia whispered. "I'm proud." The words broke something inside her. She pressed her hand to her chest, exhaling slowly. "Thank you, mi amor." When the call ended, she stared at her reflection in the glass. Calm, composed, but with eyes that carried too many mornings like this one. She whispered to herself, "It's never over. It just changes shape." Back on the freeway, Riley gave a final statement to the reporters. An officer has been taken into custody following an unauthorized firearm discharge. The individual detained was Director Elena Vargas of the FBI. No injuries reported. The microphones caught the tremor in his voice. For decades, he had defended his department, believing reform could be managed quietly. But now, under sunlight and a million screens, there was no quiet left. Elena's convoy pulled away from the scene, through the tinted glass. She saw her own name trending across news tickers. Hashtag Justice on 10. FBI director confronted at gunpoint. The world had already begun its judgment. As the city swallowed the scene behind her, she leaned back in her seat. The recorder on her wrist still blinked red. Every moment captured. The words, the gun, the sky. She closed her eyes and whispered, "Morning light never lies," behind her. Kyle sat in the back of another car, wrists raw from the cuffs. He stared out the window at the same sun, realizing that for the first time in his life, daylight had become his punishment, and the sirens, fading into the distance, sounded less like rescue and more like the end of everything he thought he was. By mid-morning, Los Angeles burned under a hard, pitiless sun. The I-10 was open again, but its asphalt still carried the echo of that single gunshot. A sound replayed on every screen in the nation, inside the FBI field office downtown. Elena Vargas stood in front of a wall of monitors. Each played the same footage from a different angle. The officer's gun, her calm voice, the moment sunlight flared against the barrel. She didn't need to watch it, but she couldn't look away. What the world now called the shot in the dawn had become the symbol of something larger than either of them. The internal probe had begun within hours. The Department of Justice had taken jurisdiction. But the FBI's own investigative unit moved even faster. Files appeared on her desk. Complaints, audio logs, transcripts, 8 prior allegations against Officer Kyle Harlan, 3 specifically involving Latinx drivers. None had led to discipline, administrative discretion. One memo said, another file contained off-duty reports, bar fights, alcohol violations, anger management referrals. She flipped through each page slowly, her hand steady though her pulse wasn't. It wasn't shock she felt anymore. It was recognition. Her assistant, a young analyst, entered the room quietly. "Director." "We found something else," she said, sliding a sealed USB across the table, private group chat logs, encrypted, LAPD officers. We cracked one thread. Elena inserted the drive into her secure terminal. The first line on the screen made her chest tighten. The group name read, Blue Line Patriots. The messages were filled with slurs, memes, threats, and open disdain for immigrants and journalists. Some accounts used fake names, but the cross-references were clear. Kyle's was among them. One message, time-stamped 2 days before the shooting, read, "Someone's got to remind these people who runs the road." She leaned back, closing her eyes for a moment. "This isn't bias," she murmured. "It's doctrine." By noon, the story had turned into a wildfire. The hashtag #JusticeOn10 had passed 70 million views. Morning anchors debated motive, experts analyzed body cam angles. Every detail of Kyle's life was now public: his divorce, his debts, even his father's disciplinary record. The LAPD's press conference at headquarters drew hundreds. But the real crowd gathered outside, in Leimert Park, under the fierce glare of the sun. A protest grew by the hour. Banners rippled through the heat. Morning light on injustice. We see you now. The crowd wasn't angry in chaos. It was angry in focus. College students, veterans, nurses, mothers with children perched on their shoulders, all chanting her name not as sympathy, but as symbol, inside the LAPD headquarters. Chief Marcus Riley stood behind a podium, sweat beading under the TV lights. He spoke carefully, each word shaped by pressure. The department condemns any misconduct, regardless of rank. Officer Harlan has been suspended pending investigation. We are cooperating fully with federal authorities. The words sounded rehearsed, but the tremor in his tone betrayed him. He knew this scandal reached deeper than one man. Elena watched the broadcast from her office, arms crossed, jaw set, Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "We see your daughter. She walks home from school at 3:15. Be careful in the morning." She froze. For the first time since the stop. Her composure cracked. "Sophia," she whispered. "She called the school immediately." The secretary answered, calm but cautious. "Miss Vargas, your daughter is safe. She's in the media studies room with staff. We've increased patrols. Keep her inside until I get there," Elena said quietly. She ended the call and stared out the window at the blinding daylight. The very light she had sworn by now felt like exposure. "They're trying to rattle me," she murmured. At the same hour, Kyle Harlan sat alone in a holding cell at the LAPD's downtown division. The walls glowed white under fluorescent light, harsher than sunlight, less forgiving. He hadn't eaten. A half-finished cup of water sat beside him, untouched. His hands trembled, not from fear, but withdrawal. No whiskey, no cigarettes, no excuses, just silence and consequence. He looked up when a guard walked by. "They still talking about me?" "Every channel," the guard replied. Kyle's eyes fell back to the floor. Figures. He thought about calling someone, but there was no one left. His ex-wife had filed for divorce the moment the footage aired. His father hadn't spoken to him in years. The department wouldn't touch him. The badge that once made him feel like somebody was now just an emblem of everything he had lost. Meanwhile, Elena's daughter Sophia was already doing what her mother feared most, stepping into the light at 16. She sat in front of a borrowed camera in the school auditorium. "My mom taught me that sunlight shows the truth," she said, her voice calm but trembling. "Now the whole world has seen it. But if you want change, you can't just share videos, you have to show up." Her words, streamed live by classmates, reached nearly 100,000 viewers by sunset at headquarters. Chief Riley received another call. The mayor's office this time. "We need you to control the streets." "Marcus," the mayor demanded, "the city can't afford another Ferguson moment." Riley sighed. "With respect, sir, this isn't just one street anymore." He ended the call and looked at the photo on his desk. A younger him and Kyle's father at graduation, both smiling in clean uniforms. "We built this wall," he whispered. "Now it's cracking in daylight." That night, news helicopters circled downtown. Protesters filled MacArthur Park. Candles replacing phones, silence replacing chants. On the courthouse steps, a young boy held a sign reading, "My mom's afraid of the morning." The phrase spread instantly. Elena drove home late, exhaustion clinging to her like heat. When she reached the door, 2 FBI protection agents waited outside. One handed her a tablet showing the latest social feed. "Ma'am, this message was posted an hour ago. On screen was a blurred photo of Sophia, taken outside her school gate. The caption read, 'The morning isn't over yet.' Her stomach turned cold. She looked up at the agents. 'Double Sophia's security. And I want a trace on that upload within the hour. Yes, director.'" Inside, she sat at her kitchen table, staring at the same sunlight that now poured through her blinds, still merciless at dusk. She pressed play on the video Javier Morales had uploaded earlier, the one that started it all. She watched herself again, sitting in her car, calm against the officer's rage for the first time. She noticed something small, the reflection in the windshield, her own face, lit by sunrise, unwavering. She realized this wasn't just her fight anymore. The city had taken ownership of it. The country had, every mother afraid for her child, every driver pulled over without reason, every officer torn between loyalty and truth. They were all part of the same glare that refused to fade. Her phone rang again. A private line. Chief Riley's voice came through, hoarse. "Elena, they're going after your kid now. You should know. Those messages. They're coming from inside the department. Some of the same names from that chat. She didn't flinch. Then the morning's just beginning. Chief. There was a pause. You're going to burn this whole city to the ground. No, she said softly. Standing by the window, I'm going to make it look at itself in the light. Outside. Downtown shimmered. Glass, sirens, sunlight, and smoke from the protests curling into the sky. The war she had spent her career avoiding had come for her doorstep. Not in darkness, but in full view of the morning sun, and for the first time in her life. Elena Vargas felt what justice truly demanded. Not silence, not patience, but endurance under the glare that never turned away. The next morning, the city felt both smaller and louder. The headlines had multiplied overnight, and the sunlight was relentless, as if the day itself had volunteered to testify. Elena woke before dawn. The house quiet, except for the soft breathing of Sophia in the next room and the distant hum of freeway traffic. She moved through the kitchen with ritual precision. Coffee. A moment at the window to watch the light strike the palm trees. A steadying breath to remind herself that memory and present were not the same thing. She had slept poorly. Images from yesterday returned in fragments. The gun. The hiss of the shot into the sky. The way Kyle's pupils had blown wide with shock. She dressed simply. No jewelry, no unnecessary color, and reviewed the stack of notes the FBI had prepared for her testimony. Her hands did not shake. That, she told herself, was all she could promise. At 10. She sat in a therapist's office downtown, a small room warmed by sunlight through blinds. The therapist was a soft-spoken woman who did not flinch at the word trauma, who had listened to soldiers and survivors and prosecutors and still kept a steady chair for the next person who needed to unburden. Elena talked, not to explain, but to unload. The smell of gasoline and morning coffee the day her father died. The strange loop of mornings that always started with promise and sometimes ended in silence. She admitted, aloud, that the sun had been her father's last witness, and that each sunrise still brought a hush in her chest. The therapist asked about coping mechanisms. Elena named them. Work. Clarity. The habit of calling Sophia once the city woke. But when the therapist asked about fear, she softened. I'm afraid not of what happens to me, she said, but what it means for my daughter and for everyone who looks to the light for safety. They sat with that sentence until it stopped shaking. Meanwhile, Kyle Harlan's morning was different in texture and tone. He woke in a cell whose walls held neither sunrise nor mercy, fluorescent lights buzzing above like interrogation. The detox went on in small, cruel increments, shaky limbs, a stomach that clenched itself, the absence of the crutch that had smoothed his edges for years. He wrote an apology that morning on a folded sheet of paper and slid it under the cell door. But the words felt like counterfeit currency to him, too thin to pay for what he had done. His lawyer visited, face pale, and advised silence, procedural steps, the mechanics of defense. Kyle only wanted one thing he knew he could not have, a rewind button that would let him step off the curb and walk a different line. Instead, he scrubbed his face in the sink, looked at his reflection, pale, boyish, gone, and tried to imagine a future that began with accountability rather than denial. Across town. Sophia Vargas woke into a different kind of morning. A school auditorium packed because students and teachers had shown up to make a point. Her classmates had organized a morning town hall and filled every chair with people who wanted policies, not just headlines. Sophia stood at the front beneath a banner someone had painted in a single confident stroke. Mornings belong to everyone. She spoke with the measured cadence her mother had taught her. Clear vowels, small pauses so listeners could feel the weight of each line. She described how mornings could be ordinary and terrifying at once, how the light that warmed breakfast tables should not be a hazard. She asked for body cameras on all patrols, for de-escalation training on every shift, for community review boards with real power. Her words were taken down, repeated, and broadcast by a local student journalist. The feed rippled outward. Parents wept quietly. A teacher wiped her eyes and mouthed, "Proud," while Sophia kept speaking, steady as an oath. Javier Morales, the trucker whose single stream had turned a roadside confrontation into a national mirror, was on CNN by noon. He sat in a studio with a producer who kept asking him to slow down for sound bites, and Javier obliged. Because the thing that had happened to him was simple. He had filmed what he saw. He told the anchor about the moment he decided to hit record, the twitch in the officer's jaw, the way the woman in the car did not flinch, and how he had not expected millions of people to see it. He spoke of immigrant families who lived in the city's margins and carried the same morning fears, of friends who had been pulled aside for no reason. His voice was plain, his Spanish lace visible in the way he formed certain vowels, and millions listened to an everyman who had become a witness. Back in Palms, Elena watched the interview in the quiet of her kitchen and felt a strange kinship, a shared pulse with the man whose camera had kept her hands steady when fear sought purchase. By mid-afternoon, legislative aides were calling. Requests for Elena to testify before the California legislature arrived with polite urgency. Committees on public safety, oversight, civil rights. She accepted one that evening, to speak to a joint session focused on police accountability. In the days between, she reviewed transcripts, consulted attorneys, and met with advocates. She rehearsed not for performance but for precision. She had always believed that facts could cut through rhetoric if presented cleanly and without spectacle. When the morning came for the hearing, the Roybal Federal Building's hearing room was full. Cameras, clergy, mothers, retired officers who had felt the sting of misguided loyalty, and dozens of students from Sophia's school who had arrived in matching shirts. The sun streamed through high windows in sharp bars, painting the room in strips of light and shadow. Elena's presence at the witness table was steady as a metronome. She addressed the assembly not as a celebrity, but as a professional. "I am here today not to vilify a single officer, but to insist that morning light does not hide bullets." Her voice carried the small, measured breaks that made listeners lean forward. She spoke of 8 prior complaints she had reviewed in the files, of encrypted chat logs the FBI had uncovered, of the institutional patterns that allowed a dangerous predisposition to fester. She did not point fingers at one man so much as at the systems that had let grievance calcify into doctrine. Lawmakers took notes. Cameras captured every inflection. When a state senator asked her if reform could be imposed without destroying morale, she answered, "Reform is not destruction. It is recalibration. A badge should protect the public. When it does not, it ceases to serve." Her testimony was both legal and moral. And when she concluded, those in the room who had come to watch a spectacle found themselves unsettled by the ordinary force of her words. Outside, the protest outside the Capitol grew in size and resolve, voices calling for body cams statewide, for a civilian oversight panel with subpoena power, for mandatory bias training and mental health resources for officers. At home that night, Elena read the letters that had arrived, some with gratitude, some with anger. She held Sophia's hand as they stood on the small front porch, the city's lights glimmering below, and felt both the weight of responsibility and the quiet assurance that action had begun. The morning had not erased scars, it had opened them to air. But when she went to bed, she did not sleep with the frantic adrenaline of the previous night. Instead, she rested with the slow fatigue of someone who had done what she could and understood that the next steps would be long. Before sleep took her, she whispered again, as if to steady both herself and the city, "Morning light doesn't hide bullets. 4 months later. The air over downtown Los Angeles carried the brittle clarity of late summer. Sunlight poured across the Edward R. Roybal Federal Building, so bright that even the marble steps seemed to shimmer with judgment. Reporters lined the entrance, microphones tilted like sunflowers toward the doorway where Elena Vargas stepped out of a black SUV. Escorted by 2 federal marshals, cameras clicked in bursts, catching her expression, calm, composed, yet carrying the fatigue of months spent under constant light. Today wasn't about survival anymore. It was about accountability. Inside. The courtroom was already packed. Every bench held a mixture of agents, officers, activists, and ordinary citizens who had followed every turn of the case. At the defense table sat Kyle Harlan, pale and gaunt, in a dark suit that hung loose on him. Sobriety had softened his eyes but deepened the lines on his face. His lawyer whispered quietly. But Kyle didn't seem to hear. His gaze was fixed on the judge's bench, where the gold seal of the United States caught the same light that had started everything. The clerk called the session to order at precisely 9 a.m. The United States versus Officer Kyle James Harlan, docket 25-1103, charges of reckless endangerment, unlawful discharge of a firearm, and violation of federal civil rights statutes. Elena sat behind the prosecution table, her testimony scheduled for mid-morning, from the gallery. Javier Morales gave a small nod when their eyes met. The man whose video had ignited the case now wore a pressed shirt and a nervous smile, somewhere beyond the marble walls. Sophia watched the live stream from her high school library, surrounded by classmates who had grown up faster than they should have. The government's opening statement was brief and cold. The prosecutor spoke not of anger, but of evidence, of a morning light that revealed what darkness had hidden. He outlined the timeline, the stop without cause, the racial slur, the warning shot into the sky, and the moment millions of Americans witnessed power without restraint. When he sat down, the courtroom felt heavier, as if the walls themselves remembered. Then came the defense. Kyle's attorney stood, clearing his throat. My client, he began, was blinded, not just by prejudice, as some would claim, but by the literal glare of a Los Angeles sunrise. He made a mistake, not a crime. He was afraid. The words hung limp in the air. Even the judge's pen paused mid-note. The idea that sunlight, rather than choice, had pulled a trigger drew murmurs from the audience. At 10:07, Elena was called to the stand. She took the oath with a hand that did not tremble. The prosecutor asked her to recount the events of that morning. She did, in measured language, never embellishing, never softening. He approached with his weapon unholstered. She said, he discharged it without provocation. I identified myself as a federal officer. He refused acknowledgement. The firearm was aimed skyward, but the danger was directed at everyone who looked like me. The courtroom was silent except for the steady tapping of a reporter's keyboard. Director Vargas, the prosecutor continued. How would you summarize what happened that day? Her answer came like a closing argument. He didn't see a director. She said quietly, he saw a Latina woman behind the wheel of a car, and in that instant, his perception replaced my identity. That's the real danger, not the weapon, but the vision behind it. From the back row, an older juror wiped at his eyes. Across the aisle, Riley sat rigid in his seat. He had testified the day before, admitting that 8 prior complaints had been mishandled. He had resigned that morning, his press statement ending with the words, "Loyalty must never outweigh truth." The defense cross-examination was polite, but futile. Director Vargas, the lawyer asked, do you believe Officer Harlan intended to harm you? She looked straight ahead. Intention doesn't erase impact when the government rested its case. The evidence filled the room. Javier's video, the FBI audio, the chat logs from the Blue Line Patriots. A digital forensic agent explained how Kyle's device had linked to extremist networks that glorified patriotic enforcement. One message in particular appeared on the large courtroom screen. Sunrise belongs to those who control it. No one spoke after that. Then Kyle asked to speak. His lawyer hesitated, then nodded. He stood slowly, adjusting his tie, eyes hollow but clear. "Your Honor," he said, "I could stand here and tell you I was scared, that I was tired, that I didn't know who she was. But the truth is, I did know what I saw. I saw a woman I didn't respect enough to protect. I saw my father's lessons instead of my own conscience, and I fired not at her, but at everything I'd been taught to fear. I can't take it back." He paused, voice shaking. "I was blinded by hate, not the sunrise." The courtroom was still, the kind of silence that comes when truth finally catches up. The judge, a woman with years in civil rights law, nodded once before speaking. "The light of day doesn't only reveal wrongdoing, Officer Harlan. It also reveals whether a man is capable of facing it. I believe you are trying to—" The sentence came quietly but firmly. 6 years in federal custody, 2 suspended, $500,000 in civil damages, and a lifetime ban on firearm possession and law enforcement employment. No cheers followed, only the sound of pens scratching as clerks recorded history. As deputies led Kyle from the courtroom, sunlight poured through the tall windows, striking his face like a final spotlight. He stopped for just a moment and turned toward Elena. "Thank you," he whispered. She gave no reply, but her eyes softened. Not in forgiveness, but in recognition of the weight he now carried. Outside, cameras flared, microphones extended, the crowd a sea of faces hungry for answers. Elena stepped to the podium briefly, flanked by Justice Department officials. "This isn't about one man or one department," she said. "It's about the distance between power and humanity, and how sunlight must bridge it." Reporters shouted questions about Sophia, about the threats, about reform. She answered only one. "Will this change anything?" She looked toward the horizon where the freeway shimmered in the heat. "Change isn't a miracle," she said quietly. "It's a habit. And today, Los Angeles practiced it, that afternoon, as the courthouse emptied. Javier stood outside watching the crowd disperse. He texted Sophia one line. "Your mom won." Sophia replied, "No, justice did." Inside his cell, Kyle sat on his narrow bed, hands clasped, staring at the window's rectangle of sunlight. He whispered the words the judge had said and let them settle into the silence. The light of day reveals all. For the first time, he didn't look away, and far above the city, the same sun that had witnessed violence now poured over glass towers and freeways, unblinking, impartial, relentless, as if to remind everyone beneath it that justice, once awakened, doesn't sleep through the morning anymore. When the sun rose again over Los Angeles, it did not feel like an ordinary morning. The city seemed quieter, its noise wrapped in reflection. 4 months had turned into a lifetime, and the story that had begun on the shoulder of the I-10 was now etched into the nation's conscience. Inside Victorville Federal Prison, Kyle Harlan awoke to the sound of a distant bell and the low shuffle of inmates preparing for roll call. He had stopped counting the days. His world had shrunk to a gray routine, work detail, counseling, meals, sleep. Yet within that confinement, something had softened. The first months had been rage and denial, then silence, and now, a strange stillness. He joined the rehabilitation program not to redeem himself, but because he no longer trusted the man he used to be. In-group therapy. When a counselor asked him to define justice, he said quietly, "It's light, and it burns." The other inmates laughed at first, but he didn't. By the time his 2-year suspended portion began, he'd become the one others asked to speak for them during sessions. When he was released, he left with a box of letters from strangers, some condemning, some forgiving, all reminders that consequence could outlive guilt. He would later take a quiet job at a rural halfway house, speaking to new officers about bias, the kind that hides behind fear. He lived simply, alone, never granting interviews. His name was still known, but his voice no longer carried authority, only warning. Back in Los Angeles, director Elena Vargas found herself in a new season of light. Her book, Sunlight on the 10, had become a national bestseller not because of scandal, but because it refused to sensationalize it. It was a memoir written in her precise, measured tone, a reflection on policy, pain, and the danger of silence. The royalties she refused to keep were turned into the Morning Light Initiative, a statewide program to retrain officers in cultural literacy, de-escalation, and transparency. Within a year, more than 5,000 California officers had completed its workshops. Departments from other states began to visit Los Angeles to observe, not to criticize. Elena led the first session herself, standing before a room of recruits as sunlight slanted through the blinds. Every morning, she told them, "You're given a choice, to see clearly or to look away. Only one builds trust." Some took notes, others just listened. And as she spoke, the tone of the city began, slowly, to change. Sofia Vargas, now 17, was standing taller too. Her viral town hall had made her a youth figure in civic reform, though she carried it with quiet grace. That spring, she received a Harvard Law Scholarship under the new Justice Education Fund, the first in her family to go when she gave her acceptance speech. She mentioned her mother only once, but the words lingered. "She taught me that fear doesn't shrink in the dark. It shrinks when you face it in daylight." The audience rose to their feet, and Elena, sitting in the back row, felt tears form, not from pride, but from relief that her daughter's mornings would be different, across California. The ripples of that case continued to spread. The state assembly passed the Morning Light Act, mandating body-worn cameras on all patrols, external auditing of disciplinary boards, and public access to complaint data. Media headlines were measured now, not outrage, but progress. Even Chief Riley, retired but still active in policy circles, spoke publicly about the price of silence, leadership. He told a symposium, "Isn't about protecting your own. It's about protecting what's right, even when it's inconvenient." His words carried more weight than he expected. For the first time in years, police unions began requesting training instead of resisting it. And then there was Javier Morales, the truck driver who had unknowingly recorded history. He'd bought a modest home near East LA with the network stipend he earned from his footage. But what mattered more was the nonprofit he launched, Drive for Truth. It trained commercial drivers to use dashboard cameras to report misconduct and protect the innocent. He liked to joke that he was still in traffic, only this time it mattered. On the wall of his small office hung a framed still from that fateful video. Sunlight over asphalt. A woman calm behind a windshield. An officer frozen mid-motion. Beneath it, he had written a single line. "Justice starts when someone decides to record, even if their hands shake." 2 years after the trial, the city honored Elena at a quiet ceremony downtown. There were no banners, no parades, just a bronze plaque installed near the Fairfax exit, marking the place where the story began. The inscription read, "Here, in the morning light of Los Angeles, truth was recorded, courage was tested, and reform began." She stood before it, the same stretch of freeway now peaceful under a pale sky. Sofia held her hand. Cameras flashed, and traffic hummed softly behind them when reporters later asked if she had ever forgiven Kyle Harlan. She paused before answering. Forgiveness isn't the point, she said. Accountability is. Sometimes justice means learning to carry the memory without letting it carry you. That night, back home in Palms, she found a letter in her mailbox, no return address, just a faint signature. She recognized the handwriting. Inside was a folded note. "Thank you for not letting the morning end." She read it once, then placed it back in the envelope, unopened beyond that line. Some things, she knew, were better left in the light, not the past, the next day. She drove the I-10 again, early, before the city fully woke. The traffic lights blinked amber, and the sky glowed soft gold over the horizon. Her hands rested steady at 10 and 2, the same as that morning years ago. The radio played a quiet news segment. All California patrols now fully equipped with 100% body cam compliance. She smiled faintly. Eyes on the road ahead, at the overpass. Sunlight flared against her windshield. Warm and familiar, for the first time. It didn't sting. It felt like peace. And somewhere in that reflection, the freeway, the dawn, the silence before the city stirred, lived the truth she had earned, that even after the burn, the morning always returns. Justice may stumble through shadows, but it never forgets its way back to the light. Thank you for watching this story. Every view, every comment, every share helps keep the fight for justice alive. If this story moved you, subscribe, leave a like, and share it forward, because real change begins when we refuse to look away.